Welcome, dear listeners, to Abyss of Horror, where the shadows of your mind meet the darkest corners of the unknown. Gather close, if you dare, and allow me to guide you into the heart of a tale that will twist your reality and make you question the very fabric of existence. Tonight's story, The Silent Watchers, takes us to a sleepy coastal town where the mundane becomes monstrous and the unseen looms just beyond the fog. Shall we begin? The Silent Watchers. The town of Harrow's Bay had always been a place out of time, untouched by the rush of modern life. Nestled on the edge of a jagged coastline, its weathered houses clung to the cliffs like ancient sentinels, forever staring out at the endless cold expanse of the sea. The air smelled of salt and decay, and the ever-present mist rolled in from the ocean, thickening the air with an oppressive weight. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else, and secrets buried themselves deep beneath the surface. It started subtly, as these things often do. The fog rolled in thicker than usual one late autumn evening, wrapping the town in a damp, suffocating blanket. That night, Edward Faulkner, a fisherman with a weather-beaten face and rough hands, saw them for the first time. He was returning home after a long, fruitless day at sea, when his weary eyes caught a glimpse of something standing out by the cliffs. They were barely visible at first. 3 figures standing completely still, their backs to the sea, facing the town. He thought it was just the fog playing tricks on his tired mind. Yet, as he walked further up the road, the figures never wavered. Their shapes grew clearer, tall, thin, and unnaturally still, as if they were waiting for something. He felt an icy prickle run up his spine, but he shook it off and hurried home, telling himself it was nothing more than shadows. But that night, as he lay in bed, Edward couldn't shake the feeling that those figures had been watching him. The next morning, they were gone. No one else had seen them, and Edward, unwilling to be labeled the town fool, kept the sighting to himself. But the feeling of being watched lingered in the back of his mind, gnawing at him like a hungry rat. The figures grew bolder with time. Each evening they appeared closer to the houses, the details of their shapes becoming clearer, though never entirely visible. Their heads seemed to tilt slightly, as if listening to something only they could hear. Those who glimpsed them up close spoke of a suffocating dread that clung to the air, of cold that seeped into the bones and lingered long after the figures vanished into the night. It was then that people began to disappear. First, it was old Mr. Halliday, who lived alone in a cottage at the edge of the cliffs. He was found in his bed one morning, his body stiff and cold, his eyes wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling. There were no signs of struggle, no apparent cause of death. The doctor said it was his heart that had given out, but the town's whispers spoke of something else, of the Watchers. Days later, it was young Sarah Milligan, barely 16, who vanished from her family's home. Her bedroom window was found wide open, the curtains fluttering in the night breeze, and her footprints led from her bed to the edge of the cliff. They found her shoes at the precipice, but her body was never recovered. The Watchers had come for her. The town was gripped with a growing sense of panic. The local police, skeptical at first, dismissed the sightings as mere paranoia. But when the chief constable himself went missing, after investigating the cliffs, the denial ceased. Something was terribly wrong in Harrow's Bay. The townspeople began locking their doors at night, drawing their curtains tight, praying that they would be spared. But the Watchers kept coming, inching closer with each passing evening. Soon it became clear that no lock, no prayer, could keep them at bay. It was around this time that Jonathan Weaver arrived in Harrow's Bay. Weaver was an investigator, a man hardened by years of chasing down unexplained disappearances and strange occurrences in forgotten corners of the world. When he received a letter from a desperate resident, one Thomas Daniels, a friend from long ago, he felt compelled to see what horrors had gripped the town. From the moment he stepped off the train, Weaver could feel the weight of the place pressing in on him. The air was thick with fear, and the few townspeople he encountered were gaunt and hollow-eyed, casting furtive glances toward the sea as though expecting something terrible to emerge from the mist. Daniels met him at the station, his face pale and his hands trembling, as he led Weaver to his small home near the harbor. "They're not human," Daniels whispered that night, after the door was locked and the windows covered with thick black drapes. "I've seen them up close, Weaver. They don't move, they don't speak, but you can feel it, like they're pulling something from you, like they're feeding." Weaver, a man not easily unnerved, felt the chill in Daniel's words. But it wasn't until he saw the Watchers for himself that night, standing in the distance, unmoving, that he began to understand the terror that gripped Harrow's Bay. They were closer now, their forms more defined, but still veiled by the thick fog that rolled in with the tide. There was something wrong about them, something deeply unnatural. The next day, Weaver began his investigation in earnest. He combed through the town's sparse records, interviewed the terrified townsfolk, and walked the cliffs where so many had vanished. What he discovered was a history soaked in secrets and old blood. There had been a time long ago when Harrow's Bay had been a place of dark rites and pagan rituals, where the townsfolk had made pacts with forces beyond their understanding to ensure their survival. A small weathered journal hidden in the archives of the old church revealed the truth. The town had once been plagued by famine, the crops failing and the fish disappearing from the sea. Desperate, the townspeople had turned to a group of mysterious outsiders, travelers who claimed they could call upon ancient powers to save the town. A pact was made, a dark, unspeakable pact. In exchange for their salvation, the town would offer something in return. Every 50 years, the Watchers would come, and the town would give them what they were owed. "We gave them blood," the journal read. We gave them souls. The town had forgotten, but the Watchers had not. They had come to collect. That night, Weaver stood at the cliffs, waiting for the fog to roll in. The town was eerily quiet, as though holding its breath. He knew the Watchers would come soon, as they had every night. But he needed to see them up close, needed to understand what they were, if he had any hope of stopping them. The mist thickened, and the figures appeared, their dark shapes emerging from the fog like shadows made flesh. They were closer than ever now, standing at the edge of the town, their featureless faces turned toward him. Weaver's heart raced, but he held his ground. The air grew colder, the fog denser, and then they moved. Slowly, unnaturally, the Watchers began to drift toward him, their feet never touching the ground, their heads tilting, as if in silent judgment. Weaver felt his knees weaken, felt the pull of their gaze, an oppressive weight that bore down on his mind. They were not of this world. They were something older, something darker. Suddenly, his thoughts fractured, his mind slipping into a cold, endless abyss. Flashes of images, screaming faces, ancient rites, blood spilled on sacred stones, assaulted him. The Watchers' purpose was clear now. They were not here to merely observe. They were here to collect what was owed. And the town, in its arrogance, had broken its end of the pact. But before we continue, dear listener, are you feeling the chill? Is the fog creeping into your mind? If you've been drawn into the darkness, make sure to like and subscribe. The abyss holds many more tales, and I promise you won't want to miss what lurks in the shadows. Weaver's vision blurred as the Watchers closed in, their faces, or what passed for faces, mere inches from his own. A low hum filled the air, vibrating in his skull, growing louder until it was deafening. His mind screamed for him to run, but his body refused to move. The Watcher's pull was too strong. He felt his will, his very essence, slipping away, draining into the cold void that surrounded them. Then, in the distance, a scream pierced the night. The sound shattered the oppressive silence, and in that brief moment, Weaver broke free. He stumbled backward, gasping for breath, his heart hammering in his chest. The Watchers halted, their heads snapping toward the sound. Another scream, this one closer, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Frantic, desperate. Someone was running toward them, and Weaver knew who it was. Daniels. The man's figure appeared through the mist, his face pale and contorted with terror. "They've taken her!" Daniel screamed, tears streaming down his face. "My daughter, they've taken her!" Weaver's blood turned to ice. He had seen the Watchers take people before, but never this close. He turned to Daniels, reaching out a hand to calm him. But it was too late. The figures moved again, their attention now fully fixed on the hysterical man. Daniel's screams grew louder, more frantic, as the Watchers closed in around him. Weaver tried to pull him back, but the cold hit him like a wall. The figures circled Daniels, their presence suffocating. In an instant, his body went rigid, his eyes wide with terror as his voice cut off mid-scream. He stood frozen, a grotesque statue of fear, before crumpling to the ground. The watchers turned to face Weaver once more. Weaver staggered back, heart pounding, knowing he was next. But something deep within him snapped. He could feel the weight of their presence pressing in on his soul, trying to pull him into the void where so many others had gone. Desperation surged through him. There had to be a way to break the pact, to end this nightmare, but the Watchers were relentless. As they closed in, Weaver made his last stand. He wasn't ready to go into the dark. And now, dear listener, as we near the end of this dark journey, I leave you with one final question. What would you do if the Watchers came for you? Would you run? Or would you face them knowing there's no escape? Let me know in the comments. And remember, like and subscribe to descend even further into abyss of horror. Until next time, beware the fog, for it may hide more than just shadows.